Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. You might have noticed today that I have some of my kids in the background. Usually whenever I'm doing a video, I send everyone either upstairs or outside because if I don't, the house is pretty noisy and chaotic. But since I'm going to be talking about how homeschooling benefits sibling relationships today, I figured why not let some of the kids be in the background. So that is actually the question. Does homeschooling benefit sibling relationships? And the short answer to that question is yes. But before I go into how that happens, I just want to point out one thing. I never knew that there was such a thing as homeschooling blogs until about my third year of homeschooling. And as I started reading these blogs, they were so helpful to me, but one thing that I noticed was a recurring theme was that whenever people would talk about how their kids got along, they would just, it almost sounded like their kids were perfect and never never fought, never did anything wrong, never didn't want to be around each other. And I used to think to myself, what am I doing wrong? Because I'm going to tell you that there is no such thing as the perfect brother-sister or sister-sister or whatever relationship between homeschooled siblings. Yes, many times they are able to get along better, but I'm going to tell you now, they do fight. Just this morning, I had my 11-year-old chasing my 8-year-old through the house because he took the remote from her. And yeah, they do bicker. And you have to remember that when kids are homeschooled, they're in the house together all the time. Day in and day out, they're with their siblings. And sometimes it can start to feel crowded, especially in my house. You know, we've got 12 people here. So it can start to feel crowded and all kids need some time to themselves. So I just want to let you know that if you're thinking that you're doing something wrong because you're homeschooling and your kids are still fighting, you're not doing anything wrong. They're kids. There's no such thing as the perfect kid. And they're going to fight. They're going to argue. But there are huge benefits to homeschooling. And I'm going to tell you what that is right now. Now, when your kids are in school all day long, they aren't with each other and they're usually getting overstimulated and overtired while they're at school. They come home and the last thing they want to do is deal with their brother or sister. So what that happens is that ends up with a lot of fighting and carrying on and bickering. And yes, I did point out that that does happen in a homeschool atmosphere, but since they are together so much, it really does happen far less often, and it's often much less intense. I'm not going to say always, because yeah, there are some intense moments in our house too. I've got intense kids, but it happens far less often. And another thing that I noticed how homeschooling benefits sibling relationships is when your kids are in school. Besides not being together all day long and not really being used to being around each other and also just being too tired to deal with one another, another thing I noticed was that since schools are separated into grade levels, that kind of gives your kids the mentality of, I don't want to play with my brother, he's 2 grades younger than I am. Or I don't want to play with my sister, she's only in 6th grade and I'm in 8th. So that mentality, I see it a lot in kids. They don't want to deal with not only neighborhood kids that aren't the same age as them, but they don't want to deal with siblings because they think, why am I hanging out with them? They're not even close to my age. But one thing I've noticed with my kids is that no matter what their age is, it's amazing how close some of their relationships are. Now, I just want to point out as an example, my 17-year-old and my 12-year-old, they are so much alike that they are one of those intense relationships that I was actually talking about. There are times that they just can't handle being around each other, but because they're so much alike, I've got to say that. I always tell my daughter that she's a girl Dylan because my son's name is Dylan. I always tell her, you're a girl Dylan. And it's true. And if you've noticed, a lot of times kids or even adults who are too much alike, often they've just got to get away from each other sometimes. So yeah, anyway, but what I was going to say was that on the opposite end, though, there are times that, since they have so many things in common, I've got them going to the creek together to find snakes and toads. Or they're both also very into art and crafting and things like that. So you'll also find the two of them a lot of times doing that. Or he'll take her to the park. And I've got to say that I don't really see that much out there. I don't really see schooled kids who are 17 and are hanging out with their 12-year-old sister. And yeah, I'm not going to say that he would prefer her to everyone, because I'm sure that there are times that he'd like to hang out with kids his own age. But what I've really got to say is that while my kids, and while I'm sure this is true of all homeschool kids, do not get along perfectly, they love each other, they truly are best friends, and they know how to play together. And I think that this is just, when you're with someone all the time, you come to a point where you realize that you've got to be with these people all the time. So you've got to learn to get along, and you make that effort. And since you're used to it, it really isn't much of a problem. So that's all that I have for you today. I just really wanted to point this out because I don't want anyone to think that they're doing something wrong if your kids are not getting along perfectly. Because to be honest, there's no such thing. So I hope you have a great day.